Namaste. Hello, people of the world. Welcome to my channel. Ross Alistair Wilson is my name. This channel is my game. Ish. Right, so this video is something about the impending cultural world global revolution. Ah! So, here's my theory. This is my theory, okay? Number one, things change. We know that. Every decade, every era, something new happens. Things progress. Things change. Number two. Things have been the same for a while now. Therefore, time to change. Nothing stays the same for very long in this life and in this world and in this universe. So, it is natural that things have to change. The sun goes down, the sun comes up. The sun goes woo, the sun goes down, the sun comes up. Change is always happening. We know that. It's obvious. The very fact that this word is different from the word a minute ago. Things are always changing. But if we had looked at the end of the 90s decade and thought, what's going to happen next? Well, we did have a kind of doomsday prediction, didn't we? Which was the 2000 Y2K bug. I don't know if you remember that, but that was a thing that there was a scare that rippled across the newspapers and radios for a little period in time, a little flurry of, oh, is the world going to end in 2000? Because all the clocks inside computers and computerized items, we were afraid that the clocks were going to get stuck and that they wouldn't know how to kind of deal with the 2000 number in them. And we thought, or some people thought, many people thought actually, that something might go wrong, that something might happen, that the world might be plunged into chaos. And what actually happened was in 2001, two planes struck into two towers in New York City, in America. And the world was plunged into a form of chaos. It wasn't a doomsday chaos, but it was like a background sense of terror. Terror is a bit strong. It's a background sense of unease. So this was a war and a threat that was vague and unformed and could exist anywhere at any time, because that's the thing with terrorism, is that anyone can be a terrorist and terrorism can strike wherever you are at any time. And this was played out when you have random bombings in random places against random targets at random times by random people. Because the nature of the terrorism that we have experienced since 2001 has been of a scattered. Probably they are organised. I mean, there are organisations behind this terrorism, but the way that we perceive them or the way that they happen is in bursts that come out of nowhere. So therefore, the feeling in the public, the sort of public atmosphere, has been on a background level. I'm not saying it's like palpable all the time, but there has been a sense in the background over a number of years that we cannot trust anyone anymore. We cannot really trust our next door neighbours, the people down the road, the people on the trains, the people on the buses, the people in airports. We cannot trust strangers. That's the perception. It's a background sense of unease, and it's manifested in lots of different ways, in that we don't really speak very much to our neighbours anymore. We tend not to speak as much to strangers. we are slightly more reserved, slightly more guarded. So all that kind of inwardness has been going on. And actually, there's another manifestation of the inwardness or the insideness of this last decade and a half. So from 2001 to no, not decade and a half, nearly 2 decades now. 2001 to present date, the insideness has increased and increased. So we stay more inside ourselves on a personal level. So we're less expressive of ourselves to your random person. We don't do random people anymore. Shaggy. No. But the other manifestation of the insideness is our obsession with the internet and the fact that you're watching this on a phone rather than seeing me in person giving a talk, for example. So this past 20 or so years, I'm just saying 20 years because it's lazy to say that, it's easy for me to say it, but it's more like 18 or so years. So last 18 or so years, pardon me, have been progressively inward looking and inward being. So you don't have children playing out on the streets anymore. I've only just recently seen a couple of children playing, like there's one girl who rides around on her bike and one little kid who occasionally pushes his what's that thing called, scooter thing, along in the streets. And I hadn't seen children playing at all. Actually, no, there have been more children playing lately. Yes, there have been more children playing on the streets lately, but they've got their parents with them and stuff. But it's like, okay, I think that's a good sign because it's a sign that there is less fear in the outside world. So you have the inside world, which is being in our homes, watching TV, watching Netflix, watching YouTube, playing on our phones, social media. It's all very inward. It's quite narcissistic. It's quite. It's at a certain level of development, as in. I'm not saying that you are at a certain level of development. I mean, culturally speaking, it reflects a certain level of emotional development. It reflects a level of development which is about the self-image and about the need for safety, physical safety and emotional safety, and then the contrasting value is about self-image. So we have self-image is actually destructive to emotional safety, in fact. But so we're inside, we're trying to stay inside, keep away from scary physical threats, and we're trying to bring about more emotional safety by staying inside. But then also you have this self-image thing that's going wild all the time on all the various different ways that you can write about yourself, post pictures about yourself, post videos about yourself, and create an image of yourself, both to yourself and to other people. So it's madness, I tell you, madness. Anyway, yeah. But nothing stays the same for very long. So it's my belief that although there are people who are saying, oh, we're all stuck on social media and it's so terrible and so on. Well, no decade has given way to another decade and stayed exactly the same. It just doesn't happen. The 1910s gave way to the 1920s, and then each decade as it progresses, something new comes along, something new happens. There's a change of tone, or there's a change of atmosphere, or there's a change in music, there's a change in values, there's a change in the level of happiness, change in fashion. Obviously things are always changing. So it's my perception and my feeling that the past 18 or so years have been pretty grotty. Okay, just overall. They do not contain many happy memories for me, I must say. But I have the feeling that this next decade will contain a lot of happy memories, possibly even the next 2 decades. Because I feel like this kind of cloud of negativity, or this sort of black curtain of smog and background fear, is going to start dissipating and lifting. um, because it just can't stay the same. It's like impossible for life to stay in one form forever. It just doesn't do that. Um, so basically, what I'm saying is I'm optimistic for the coming decades. I think there are good reasons to be optimistic as well, which are that there is actually less war in the world than there's ever been before. I don't know that as a fact, but I feel it is true. Therefore, it is true. um, and I honestly feel like this social media and inward lookingness, the online world, is a developmental stage in our emotional psychological development as human beings. And I feel like it's something that we will integrate in a different way over the next 2 decades, maybe even beyond. But I don't have like superhuman guessing powers. But I feel like it's coming to our attention more and more that the social media and online world is not very psychologically healthy a lot of the time, because we have cyberbullying, trolling, we have people who are addicted to this, we have people who kind of get sucked into their own online personas and then realize at some point that it has been a form of self-delusion or self-denial or whatever, and then they come out of that bubble world and pull out into the real world because something happens, I don't know what, and then they go through this kind of emotional devastation feeling. So I feel like because we're becoming more aware of it, it's likely to change. When we have awareness of an issue and we are aware that this is a negative thing for us, then our natural inclination is to try and change it and to make it better. And luckily, social media addiction is something that we can change ourselves using our own volition and willpower. So I think that's fairly simple. I'm saying that generally speaking, because it is something that we choose to do, that we can choose to stop it. It's an addiction of the mind rather than an addiction of the body. So it's not like a chemical addiction in that sense, although it have similar effects. But yeah, so that's my feeling on that. So I don't think we should be particularly concerned for the long run that this is going to continue. You can't have ongoing negativity of the same form forever, because it disintegrates under its own negativity. You know, wars don't last forever. Problems don't last forever. Nothing lasts forever. There's a constant renewal of change in the universe and in society and in humankind. So so I see basically that we've gone through a hell of a lot of negativity in the past 18 years or so, the past 2 decades, and the only sensible conclusion to make is that this cannot continue forever, because people won't stand for it. It will just change naturally. You know, it will run its course. Tides will change. Things will move along. Something else will come out. Their values will just shift somehow and move in a different direction. And also, I think that the technology that we have at the moment is going to be, we're going to have a more mature relationship with it. I think that at the moment there is still a sense of newness to it, because there are a lot of apps going on, and we're kind of still excited about all these new little sort of psychological trinkets that we can play with on our phones and on our computers and iPads and whatever. But I think that there is a natural craving in human beings to return to physicality. So we will want to reconnect with our bodies we will want to reconnect with the outside world. We will want to reconnect with people in person. We will want to reconnect with a sense of community, because there is a sense that social media has isolated us. I certainly feel isolated by it. But then there's these kind of like poles of forces that play against each other. So the isolation is nice in a way because it keeps you safe. You're inside. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't run into the threats of the unknown outside world, which is kind of scary sometimes. But then there's a pull as well that people feel to go out, be sociable, to want to interact with people, and that we don't want to be scared. That we want to have good interactions with people. We want to feel friendly. We want, like, it's natural to want to feel loved, to feel accepted, to feel happy, to want to have a feeling of goodness in your life. And that is, I believe, is the direction of the human soul, is that the human being is always wanting and moving towards, in whatever way it can, situations and feelings that are better than where they have been. So even when you're depressed, for example, the goal of depression is actually it's trying to move you somewhere better. And depression is kind of like a mechanism that is sort of says everything has been wrong for a long time. Can't do anything. And the reason it does that is because the depression wants a change into positivity. And some people get stuck, and the way that they find their positive escape from depression is to commit suicide. But even from that point of view, suicide is viewed as a better alternative to being depressed or to having a shit life or whatever they perceive as wrong with their lives. So the human soul, I believe, is always, or the human spirit, or just the human being, is always looking for how can they improve their life? How can they make themselves feel better? How can, like, even people who go about killing, their goal is to satiate their needs and to make themselves feel better. Because someone who has an obsessive need to kill other people, like a serial killer, they don't do it to make themselves feel bad. They do it to make themselves feel better. As disgusting and horrible and disgraceful as it is, the reason they're doing it is because they've got this horrible feeling that they need to kill in order to feel better. And they're actually trying to feel better in the same way that someone else is trying to feel better by having a wank. So what I'm saying is, if you're a wanker, you're a serial killer. No. Yeah, so what I'm saying is that that there are reasons to feel positive about the upcoming 2 decades. Yeah, there you go. That's it. Because I think that we've got a bit overcomplicated in this most recent set of decades. You know, the internet and smartphones have really complexified, that is a new word I've made, complexified our lives, made it more complex, and with far more little pieces. You know, this app, that app, this app, that app, this way of doing things, that way of doing things, this way of receiving information, that way of receiving information. So many outlets and outputs and inputs, you know, so many different ways of receiving music, receiving media, receiving information, news, you know, blah, 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 blah. It's a noise. It's a hell of a lot of noise. And if I'm aware of it, then other people are aware of it. I've always felt that way. If I like something, then someone else is going to like it. If I hate something, someone else out there, then wherever they might be, are going to hate it. If I'm aware of something, someone else is going to be aware of it. So I think a lot of people already are aware of this sense of complexity, and there's too much going on. There's too much to take in and too much to make sense of. I think this is a decade, or has been a decade, of sensory overload and information overload and overstimulation and mental noise, mental incoherency. You know, it's like tuning into a radio station that plays like 1 second clips of things. And I think that there is a natural calling that people have inside to things like simplicity, easiness, naturalness, feeling good, happiness. And that when you become aware of yourself, you start to want to move towards sensations of happiness. So yeah, so I think that we're going to come through this last part of the decade, and there will be, I don't know what exactly they will be, but there will be some changes in the way our societies work. Could be subtle, could be major, that just move things back towards a happier way of being. Because as I look through the last decades, there's a tiny little bit of research on what people think are the best and worst decades. People have tended to say that the 80s and the 90s, or at least the 70s, 80s, and 90s, have been picked as decades that people really like. When I look through when I look through the sort of films and adverts from the 80s and 90s, particularly, there is a sense of more upbeat, more optimistic, more kind of happy. Especially in the 90s. Like the 90s is kind of like this bubble of this rosy, happy, bright, um, kind of warm and furry, fuzzy, feeling around everything that came out from the 90s. And some people don't like that because it's too saccharine. But I like it because that was what I grew up with. The 80s also, though, if you look back at the 80s, there is a sense of kind of moving up somehow, or moving forward in the 80s films and stuff. I don't like the 80s music. I think the 80s music is a bit kind of depressing and down, but then again, it depends what you listen to, obviously, as well, doesn't it? And it also depends how you see and feel about the things that come out. Because some people will listen to a piece of depressing music, which one person thinks is depressing, another person thinks this is great because it's so passionate and expresses the deeper part of their soul. you know So one person's depression is another person's passion, and one person's joy is another person's cliche, or what's that word, triteness, campiness or something. So one person who loves it feels shit about it, hates it. But I think, just from my perspective, looking back through the decades, that the 90s it seems to have this kind of bubble, this aura of yellow, golden color around it, and that's partly, I think, to do with the way that things were presented through TV, because everything did seem to have that kind of yellowy tone to it, and this like sort of glowing tone coming off the screen, the 90s kind of lighting or whatever. But actually, when I've looked back through even home videos and look at like how things appear in the background, that things appear in the local areas around my area to be kind of happier looking. Actually, the things are taken care of more nicely. I don't know if that makes any sense. Like the outside world on the street, the people on the street actually look happier, and it looks cleaner as well. Like I think there's kind of I was just looking around, and when I was riding down riding to my local Costa coffee, and I was just looking at the roads around my area and thinking, God, these look like they haven't been relaid since about 30, 40 years or something. Probably 30 years or maybe 20 years. No, more than 20 years, about 30 years. They've been patched up, and they're really patchy. There's loads of old buildings that look like they're kind of falling apart. So I feel like if I'm noticing it, someone else is noticing it, and that therefore people are going to be wanting to renovate areas, a sense of newness to come about. Some areas might be bulldozed and regenerated, stuff like that. And Yeah, there is an issue that I'm a bit concerned about though, which may not change, but then again it might do in the next 2 decades, and that is pollution, air pollution. Um, my local area feels very polluted. I'm in Slough, which is near London, and it feels and just the air outside just feels so dirty. It's horrible. And I am hoping that there are going to be some ways that we are going to be implementing soon about reducing air pollution, um, because there have got to be some like ways of trapping air pollution and sort of capturing particulates and stuff like that, because I've seen them um, demonstrated before. So I think that we've got to look at that, because um, I think that's really starting to become an issue now. So it would be good if we had some technology that would help us with dealing with air pollution, and I'm sure it's out there. It's just not here. Like we should have whatever system is necessary to reduce air pollution. There should be down this road. Okay, there should be some kind of, I don't know, pollution extractor units or something. I mean, the good thing is that our exhaust fumes, as we move forward in time, are getting less dirty. And because we're using different types of power as well in cars now, you've got hybrid cars and stuff, and electric cars and whatever. So I think that the air pollution will go down, but I'm a bit concerned about it. I'm concerned about it for my health, because I feel crap outside a lot of the time just because the air quality is horrible. So that needs to change. That's polluting the air. My farts are polluting the air. Yeah. But as I say, I don't think it can be horrible forever, because we naturally want things to move into better directions. So the problems of the last 2 decades eventually will start to be clarified and solved, and then we'll have different problems. But hopefully we'll have a period of time where we can enjoy the fruits of the changes that we've made in the past 2 decades. So it's like I see the 90s as a period where all the work and labour and change that happened in the previous decades had a period of fruition, if that makes sense. So the 90s is like the end of the century, where so much technological change happened during that century, and there were some terrible world wars, which both inspired technological development and killed a fuckload of people. So that was good and bad, good and bad. Hell of a lot more bad. But also, sometimes the things that come out of tragedies can be the richest sources of goodness as well. So tragedy can, once you like learn from tragedy, once you like vow to not make the same mistakes again, once you heal from tragedy, you come to a better place, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, so I see that the end of the 20th century was encapsulated very well in the feeling of the 90s. It was like a big celebration for everything that had come before, and what we had achieved as a species, um, and we were very happy. And it was a kind of time where like we were enjoying being alive. And then some different shit went down in this next millennium, and now we're kind of starting again in a build again to better feelings, better places, better understandings, and so on. So basically, I'm just saying there's reason to be hopeful for the next decade. I know I've been very vague and very general, because that's the way I experience things. I tend to kind of intuit things rather than I don't really have much specific knowledge about what will happen, but I just feel like I try and feel the tone of things, um, rather than the specifics of things, and I feel a tone arising in the next couple of decades that is more happiness oriented and that has more fun in it somehow. And somehow I'm hoping that the air will be clearer. Anyway, that's that again. I keep talking about this topic because I'm very drawn to it. You know, I've been feeling like the last 2 decades have been shit for a while, and I've been looking forward to the next 2 decades for a while. Hopefully, my predictions will turn out to be correct. That there will be a happier feeling over the next 2 decades, but who knows? Maybe there'll be a massive world war instead, and I have just talked absolute shit out of my ass for the last 30 minutes. Well, we can only hope and move ourselves and our thinking towards better feelings and better situations. All right, then. That's been my cultural revolution around the corner thing again. Welcoming in, hopefully, a new feeling of the 80s and 90s. Yeah. Okay, bye.